Welcome to this episode of BeelerCast. We've got a special episode today, and it's a couple reasons that today's episode is special. One, you'll probably notice, I am not Rob Beeler. We actually don't even have Rob Beeler with us today. We've got two members of Team Beeler, and we have taken over the podcast. So Nicholas Treveri, who I like to think of as our social and community man behind the scenes, and then myself, Melissa Chapman. I'm collaborator with Beeler.Tech, all things Beeler.Tech, and my pronouns are she and her. The second thing that makes today special is we're going to be focusing today on the Revenue Operations Barometer research that we just did. And so with us, we have Ian Gibbs, the Research and Insight Specialist with CoLab Media Consulting. Thanks so much for joining us, Ian.
Not at all. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Lovely, lovely. Well, let's go ahead and jump right in here. So, could you give us a little bit of background about yourself before we get into the barometer?
Yeah, sure. My favorite thing, talking about myself. Look, it's great to meet everyone. So my name's Ian Gibbs. I'm a research data insight professional by trade. I have been working with the guys at CoLab for the last few years to bring our Rev Ops Barometer to market. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. I specialize in kind of like media and advertising measurement and anything related to that. And of course, AdOps very much relates to that. But my background, I sort of worked with a number of different clients, but my background to that, a few years ago, I left The Guardian in 2016. I spent about 10 years at The Guardian, heading up their commercial insight team. So my background is very much publisher side. Didn't work in the AdOps team, but I worked very closely with the AdOps team, which is why I can really relate to lots of the challenges that we're going to be talking through today.
Thank you. That's great. I don't think I ever knew that exactly. Knew that much about your background. So could you tell us a little bit give us the overview of the Rev Ops Barometer, right? Beeler.Tech has been participating and helping, and that has changed a little bit over the years. But if you can let everybody know on the podcast kind of what it is and the history of it, and then let's jump into some of our findings.
Okay. So, the Rev Ops Barometer has been running for the last 3 years. It was an annual survey. It's now a biannual survey, which is good because it means that it's picking up traction and credibility, and people are willing to participate twice a year rather than once a year now. And over the last few years, we have interviewed over 400 publishers globally. The most recent wave in the second half of this year, H221. We had 176 responses from that many publishers, which is a record, which is great. And essentially, what we're doing is we're looking into the sort of attitudes and opinions of RevOps and AdOps professionals. We sometimes use the terms interchangeably. Actually, I'm not sure we should, but anyway. And we're looking at the sort of business challenges they face, their priorities for the coming year, and the opportunities that they see in the market as well. And it's it's a sort of experienced pool of respondents. About 2/3 of them have over 10 years experience in AdOps. They have a good global spread. I have to say, in the last wave, the majority were based in the US, although there was a good global spread of responsibilities. Over half had global responsibilities for AdOps and RevOps, and 36% had sort of EMEA responsibility. So it is a good global spread. And probably the final thing I should say about it in terms of who we're talking to is about half of the publishers we talk to are digital pure plays, but the other half are, I was going to use the term legacy media, but I hate the term legacy media. I've been watching too much Succession recently, sorry. Heritage media, it's a combination of like print and TV and those sorts of organizations. So it's a nice cross-section that we're talking to.
Thank you, that's great. All right, well, let's jump in. I think we did a top 5, right? Kind of key takeaways. So why don't we start there, Ian, with you kind of taking the audience through what those were?
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so in terms of, I guess, our top 5 highlights, let's walk through them one by one, and you guys let me know what you think. But I think, what is very obvious, and we see this every quarter, and we have the highest levels of agreement that we've ever had with this statement, is that programmatic continues to redefine the AdOps sort of role and skill set. Publishers almost sort of unanimously agree that their role is changing because of programmatic. 95% of publishers agree with that. And, if you look at all the other challenges that people face, it's kind of obvious why. They're just being asked to not just do more with less, but also just have a broader range of responsibilities. They had to handle vast amounts of data. They had to deal with issues like ad fraud and privacy and consent, things that they might not have even ever expected to have dealt with when they got into the industry, say, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago. So I think that there is certainly a sense of being stretched and having to pick up lots of different skills as a result.
Yeah, and I think the piece for me that's so interesting, and the publishers that I've worked with in the past were largely direct sale publishers, right? We did some programmatic, but we weren't primarily programmatic. We weren't over 50% programmatic. But that the fact that header bidding came out, 6 or 7 years ago, and it's still continuing to change the role of ad ops professionals, that's so interesting to me. It seems like it just keeps getting more technical and more detailed and more players. And for me, it's a very complicated space, but I just think that's interesting.
Yeah, and do you know what? It's funny because some of the issues that we talk about, I mean, they almost fall within, I suppose, it's almost within the power of an ad ops or rev ops professional or even their manager to help do something about this, upskill in some of those areas. Some of the issues that I've identified in the report, I kind of think you have to say, well, these are bigger, broader market issues that the average professional can't really deal with. And that's actually one of our second findings, is that, concerns around the GAFA group, the Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, or the digital duopoly just of Google and Facebook, it shows sort of no signs of abating. Very few respondents believe that regulation is having any effect on them. But at the same time, I think there's probably a sense, what can you really do about it? You've got to focus on what you can do something about, right?
Absolutely. And this one's a complete mystery to me about how it will actually shake out and what's really going to happen, right? I mean, I try to keep up with the news on this, especially around Google and the changes with Apple and what that means for identity and privacy kind of in our space. But this is a tough one, right? To predict. So yeah, I'm not surprised people feel that way.
I just called it the GAFA group. I should call it the Gamma group, of course, shouldn't I now that Facebook have rebranded to Meta? Sorry. Yes.
True, and I didn't catch it. Good call, Ian.
So I mean, the third one, this will probably come as no surprise to people. We have seen sort of plummeting levels of preparedness for a sort of post-third-party cookie world. The majority of publishers, and I just mean over 50%, do say that they are ready for a world without third-party cookies. They're ready for the depreciation of third-party cookies. But the numbers absolutely plummeted. We had 77% saying they're prepared in the first half of 2021, only 54% in the latter half of 21. And, I know we've got, I don't know, maybe until 23 before Google turn the taps off, but I don't know. It's really starting to hit home, I think, the impact that it can have on publishers' businesses.
So I can't help but wonder that to go from the 70s to the 50s, right? So before Google gave the extension, right, the Chrome extension of the deprecation of cookies, we thought, okay, we think we're about 70% of us think we're ready. And now only 50%, well, it's a little more than 50, I know, think we're ready. And so I can't help but wonder, is that because we've gotten smarter about all the things we might not know? Or were we just overly confident in each one? I mean, I don't know that you can answer that, but it's a seriously interesting question to me, because I expected to see some change there, but that's a really big difference.
I know. And, one of the frustrating things that researchers like me often say when they're presenting is that, good research can answer some questions, but it often just prompts 10 more questions. I think this is absolutely an instance where it's done that. But I think, and I sort of hate to use Donald Rumsfeld language, but it's like, it's class. You're right. Perhaps it's about unknown unknowns. Actually, the sort of level of our knowledge around this has been highlighted, or lack of knowledge, over the last 6 months. So maybe that's having an impact.
Yeah, fair enough.
At the same time, of course, it's linked. I mean, proving the quality and performance inventory is a top priority. With third-party cookies on the way out, if we can't be assured that our ad is going to be targeted at, the person that we want it to be targeted at, we have to prove quality in other ways. I think, and we'll see later on as well that optimizing ad performance is a top priority in the same space. And we could talk a little bit more about this later on, perhaps. But for me, I think, the question is, what does quality look like? Is it quality in ad delivery? Are we talking about, low fraud and high viewability, or are we talking about quality in terms of like outcomes for advertisers? Because at the end of the day, they want to shift the dial on sales or brand metrics. So yeah, bit to unpick there, I think, as well.
I think that's a great call out, and maybe something we should clarify in future waves, right? Is what do people mean when they say quality in that case? Because I certainly know I had an assumption going into that, and I think I agree with you. I think this is just the pressure behind this is only going to grow as third-party cookies go away, and I mean it's been table stakes for certainly a while, but I think it's just turning up the volume on this area for publishers. Which kind of brings us to the last. Anyway, I'll let you hit the last point, and then I have some commentary.
Well, yeah, I mean, the final point was just, fraud obviously remains a challenge yet to be solved. I mean, we do see quite a lot of respondents. 77% of respondents say that they think that industry initiatives are actually having like a positive impact on fraud. And that number declined slightly from last quarter. It was about 81%, but it's not that significant. It's around that kind of high 70s, low 80s mark. A bit surprising for me. I mean, the war on ad fraud is not over, but there's a little bit of optimism amongst respondents. But yeah, I think even if you think I guess industry initiatives are having like a small, marginal, incremental sort of positive impact, doesn't necessarily mean, I guess, you think that the war is over.
The war is over.
Yeah.
I just, when I think about this whole picture, and I put my publisher hat on, having been at a publisher for a very long time, I feel like this is the most complicated time to be a publisher that it ever has been, right? So yes, you need to continue to have the table stakes and provide your advertisers the value they want, and there's much more measurement and closer eagle eyes on that sort of thing. And then you've got these big, huge initiatives around identity and privacy that we really have to tackle that can't generally be tackled in an ad ops team, right? They're cross organization initiatives that really need to be handled. And often they're driven by ad ops, but they can't be solved just by ad ops. And then, gosh darn it, we still have to keep dealing with fraud on top of that, right? Like, I wish we had fraud solved, because I feel like, so somebody's still breaking into your house while you're trying to figure out how to make it to the moon, right? It's a complicated time to be a publisher, revenue ops, or ad ops person right now.
It is, and it's also like information overload. I mean, like, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, I'm sure we all do, and there is a lot of conflicting opinion about it. You have the industry body-led movements around it. You've got lots of independent organizations and consultants with their own solutions as well. It's there's a lot to unpick, especially when you are short of time, quite frankly, as an ad ops professional.
Agreed. So I think that's a good kind of pivot to a question that I have for you. So one of the things that we've done in this research is we have this concept of a maturity index. And I think that's helpful for publishers to compare themselves and think about kind of where they, not compare themselves in a negative way, but to think about where they are, where their organization is in the overall. So can you talk to us a little bit more about what the maturity index is and how we set it and all the good color behind it, please?
Yeah, sure. So the maturity, there's lots of different ways in which you can split the data. We've talked about some of them already, like region and like type of business, and whether it's high or programmatic usage business. But sometimes those kind of like binary ways of splitting the data might sort of lose some nuance in terms of how we segment out different publishers and media organizations. So this is where we came up with this idea of maturity. And I like the definition of maturity. I'll be honest, it's slightly evolved over the last couple of years, but we're in quite a good place with it now. What I quite like about our current definition is that we only use 3 questions to define maturity now, which from a sort of nerdy market research point of view, the fewer questions you ask to get to the end point, is a good thing. And so literally it is about the extent to which our respondents agree with these 3 statements. And one of them is about the publisher having an effective suite of technology to support all ad operations. The other one is about people agreeing that their current ad tech stack is comprehensive and ensures that revenue is maximized. So they're quite sort of technology focused. And then the third one is the extent to which they agree that their business is building diverse revenue streams. And that, that could be sort of diverse geographically, or it could be diverse in terms of, we've got ad revenue and we've got subs revenue over here and a whole suite of other products. So diversification is key as well. And that kind of splits our sort of our sample pool roughly into thirds of like, high maturity, medium maturity, and low maturity. And the point is, it really does pull the data apart. So, I mean, those of you who have our reports, I'll sort of refer you to page 11. And if I might just share that page quickly, just so I can show everyone what I'm referring to. Hopefully you can see that okay.
Yes.
So what we've got here, some real differences between high and low maturity groups. So, for example, 80% of high maturity publishers say that they're well prepared for depreciation of third-party cookies, versus just 50% of low maturity groups. And similarly, high maturity groups say that they're more likely to say they have a greater ability to collect and monetize third-party data. They're more likely to say they're winning the battle on ad fraud. So they are more sophisticated in that sense. The really telling difference, though, it comes down to like one core factor, which is around senior management buy-in. Like pretty much all of the high maturity groups say that senior management understands their area of the business. It's hands-on. It really does understand the investment levels required to maximize the potential of ad and Rev Ops. Only 36% of low maturity groups agree with that. So I think that is really telling. And I'm sure, there'll be people listening to this podcast who will think, who will have differing levels of opinions about, I guess the line that they've got into the C-suite and the confidence the C-suite has in them. And, what's quite good about the Rev Ops Barometer is that people aren't afraid to leave us lots of comments, which is a good sign of engagement, lots of sort of open text comments. And, we've had comments about sort of under communication, workload, bandwidth, expectations from the C-suite. They see the word programmatic, they think automation, so everything should be nice and easy. We know that couldn't be further from the truth sometimes. And if we are stretched as professionals, we need help prioritizing as well. So I think this is a real distinction between high and low maturity groups that I think has a big bearing on how, I suppose, ad ops and Rev Ops opportunities are sort of maximized, as it were.
Yeah, and agreed. And it's probably directly impacts how those teams feel too, right? They probably can feel that well in their teams. If you don't have that good line and good understanding, you spend a lot of time either being misunderstood or explaining yourself and trying to help justify things, which is part of the reason, we do this report, right, is to give our publishers insights into what other publishers are doing, which helps them make informed decisions and also helps them inform internally within their own teams.
Yeah, there is definitely a sort of benchmarking role for this report. Where do you sit in that maturity index? Are you high, medium, or low? And do you face the same challenges and others? And what will it take to get to high maturity? And I think, we didn't show it in the most recent report, but the report before last, we did show that high maturity was also linked to high revenue expectations as well. So, there are tangible, positive revenue implications for being a high maturity business. I think the other thing I'd say as well, and this is on page 14 of the report, it tends to be that high and medium maturity businesses are twice as likely as low maturity businesses to have a sort of good degree of confidence in their current or intended identity solution. So, going back to the whole depreciation of third-party cookies. Now, you can look at this two ways. High maturity businesses, great that they're more confident. We've still got less than half of our respondents saying they're very confident. For those who aren't, what are the issues? And perhaps this goes back to this whole people sort of starting to get a better sense of what they don't know now. And probably what is clear is that there are lots of identity solutions on the market now, and perhaps it's hard to unpick which is the most appropriate one. We all know there aren't really any plug and play solutions out there. It takes a lot of time and effort to implement them. And also we've had comments from our respondents as well about scalability. So yeah, high and medium maturity, more likely to have confidence in low maturity groups and identity solutions, but there's a long way to go, I'd say, for both groups.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think this lines up, it kind of ties back to what I was saying earlier, right? So having a good identity and privacy strategy is not an ad ops function, right? So if you need to be working with the C-suite or other teams within your organization. And if you're high maturity, based on our research, right, you have a better line into the executive levels of your company. So you probably have a better conversation around identity and privacy. So that all feels right to me. And I shouldn't say right, but I'm not surprised by that. Let me say it that way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the thing about maturity as well is I think it's very easy to think, oh, well, like a digital only business must be a mature business, and like, heritage media must be, low maturity. Digital must be high maturity, legacy sort of low maturity. That's not the case, and that's why we produce this maturity index, because if it just told us exactly the same thing as another segmentation, there's no point doing it. So yeah, don't think it's as simple as digital versus non-digital. And frankly, if I think back to my time at The Guardian, we did have quite a sophisticated ad ops team and good buy-in from senior management. That's a heritage business, but at the same time, they probably class themselves still as high maturity.
Got it. Well, let's pivot a little bit. So one of the things is that we do with Barometer is we're gathering feedback from all over the world, right? And then you and the team are actually cutting that data and looking at some of the regional differences. So can you talk to us about what you found there?
Yeah, look, having sort of run lots of like multinational or global research projects, one thing, to be honest, from a researcher's point of view, is that people in different regions do answer research in different ways sometimes. Some people are more positive than others. Some people nationally are just more positive than others. And what we'll always see, what we've always seen, is that our EMEA and rest of world respondents tend to record higher levels of agreement, tend to be a little bit more positive than North America and US respondents. That said, the gap has widened in the second half of 2021. So I think there's a real divergence. It's not just a research effect. There is a real divergence in confidence. Now, so for example, what's a good example?
That's what I was. Yeah, thank you.
Three quarters of sort of EMEA and rest of world publishers say that they're well prepared for the depreciation of third-party cookies, versus just 59% of US and North America publishers. We've got 79% of EMEA saying that their business has seen an increase in subscription revenues, versus just 56% in US and North America. Now you can kind of go through each of these points, start creating hypotheses for each of them. From the subscription revenues point of view, obviously in the US, there's just a lot more competition for eyeballs. There's a lot more competition for subs, and there's only so much disposable income your average consumer has. They're not going to be able to, fund 10 different subscriptions a month. Our EMEA respondents are all often based in different markets where there is less competition. So it does make sense that they would see larger increase in those subs revenues. But it's interesting unpicking those differences.
Do you have any insights? And if you don't, maybe it's something we look at in the future, but why outside of the US, there's more positivity around the whole identity privacy piece, the first one you mentioned there?
Well, it is a hard one to pick. I do wonder, frankly, and I don't want to sound too disparaging, but perhaps there is just less. Perhaps it comes back to this point you're making earlier, Melissa. Perhaps they just don't know what they don't know yet. I don't know. Or perhaps there are fewer vendors to select from, so actually the choice seems like an easier one to make when dealing with various issues. It's hard to say.
Or maybe they're just more buttoned up. Right? Yeah, they actually are, right?
Do you know what? There is one area where US publishers are more confident than EMEA, and that's in this idea of cross-platform, cross-screen measurement. I'm just trying to find the data point now. I can't actually find it in the report to top of mind, but yeah, there is definitely more confidence in their ability to monetize monetize ad revenue across different screens and platforms. Much higher levels of agreement on that in the US than EMEA and the rest of the world. I think one of the reasons are because you got the legacy. It's a legacy TV factor in the US. I think we've probably got bigger players in the US who obviously by necessity have to monetize a multi-screen approach. If we look at also I guess some of the sort of cross-screen sort of industry measurement solutions being championed by advertisers and agencies. Project Origin, for example, that is more advanced in a more advanced stage in the US than it is in the UK, for example, which would explain. So I think there are some tangible reasons there, but that's the one area where we see greater confidence in the US than elsewhere. Yeah.
Interesting. So when you look at the data, right, as a analyst and researcher, what was really surprising to you in this round of the research?
I mean, we've already discussed the kind of if there's absolute drop off in people's sort of level of preparedness. I mean, that was a surprise.
That's the huge one,
20%,
right?
20 percentage point. But there's other things as well. I mean, like there has been a drop off in people saying that user data and privacy is well protected. We saw like about a year ago, we saw 77% agreement with that. It dropped about 70% the first half of the year. It's down to 66%. Now the audience isn't consumers, but if I was a consumer and I read that, I'd be a little bit worried. I was like,
Fair.
So, well, but I have to ask why. And I think at the same time, it's almost it's almost correlated to people's just agreement that programmatic is changing the skill set. And lots of comments we're getting about how stretched people are. They can't possibly focus on anything. And I think potentially that is going to be to the detriment of some very important and reputationally quite important business issues like privacy. So I was surprised to see that, but I think resource, senior management buy-in are needed to address these sorts of issues because they are of reputational concern.
Agreed. And I'm both so thankful we got the extra time, right? So that everybody, but it's a long slog for lots of publishers to get through, right? Lots of work, lots of time, and lots of options, right? Not just identity solutions, but overall business strategy and how are you going to approach it and what does that look like for your revenue and how do you sell that through, and that changes as we learn more, right? And hear more from the buying side about what they want to do, and that certainly doesn't seem settled yet, right? So there's a lot more to come there.
I mean, with all of these things, with the sort of ability to sort of store and monetize and collect first party data, readying yourself for a post third party cookie world, dealing with privacy concerns. Publishers are probably looking at the vendor landscape and saying, how do I have time to select the most appropriate solution? I mean, when I talk to advertisers direct, they're asking about like the most appropriate identity solution, even those who haven't in-housed. And it's quite a minefield for them, but they just want to be able to make sure that they can speak the same language as their agencies, or speaking the same language as their publishers. So there is, I think marketers in general need a lot of help sifting through the most appropriate solutions in these areas. And it's not saying which is better or worse. As we know, some solutions are just more appropriate than others.
Absolutely.
An email-based solution might be more appropriate for some, and so on and so forth.
All depends on your business, right? And the data that you have, whether you're on the marketer side or on the publisher side.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. I think my last question for you, Ian, is did you come across any insights that you felt like kind of busted any myths we might be dealing with in our community or in our industry?
Yeah, do you know what, actually, and I'm just going to share the screen one more time, but I'm going to refer our listeners to slides to page 13 in the report, because and to be honest, it kind of references what I was talking about earlier, that I do think that there is a myth that if you're a digital pure play, you are advanced, you are mature, and heritage legacy media isn't, and what we found couldn't be further from the truth. So actually, to be fair, in North America, so US and Canada, so digital pure plays were actually quite mature. They're also quite high programmatic users. The print heritage publishers in the rest of the world were actually very mature as well. And I think this is probably driven out of necessity more than a TV heritage business. Of course, there are shifting nature and way consumers are obviously watching TV, but it's still massive in scale.
Yeah.
It's very different for a print publisher whose print revenue is obviously fallen off a cliff. By necessity, they have had to become a mature ad ops business. So I think that's an interesting myth that has been busted. And actually, some of the sort of the lowest maturity group are actually sort of EMEA and rest of world TV heritage businesses.
That's interesting.
So I think they there is a sense that they're just these huge sort of Goliaths who haven't necessarily needed to get up to speed yet, but they will need to. And especially, so if we look at that stat that we talked about earlier, that publishers in EMEA are not necessarily making the most of multi-screen monetization opportunities. Yes. This feeds into that. They should be, and they need to become more mature to do that. So I thought there's some really interesting stuff there. So page 13 of the report goes through that in more detail, but yeah, plenty of myths to be busted there. Pure play digital does not necessarily mean you're the most mature, and vice versa.
Lovely. And by the way, and I know we're on a podcast, everybody, so you can't all see the slide, but this matrix that Ian and the team put together is so useful to just get a good visual for kind of where different organizations fall. And with that, I think we need to wrap up this session of our BeelerCast. So if anybody that's listening would like to download the report, you can go to colab-consulting.com/research, and you'll find this research and previous versions there. And for those of you out there, we are going to be fielding H1 2022, probably starting in January. So everybody keep an eye out for that. The more people that participate, the better the research is. And all of our publishers that are respondents, all receive a full copy of the report as soon as it's published. And Ian, I want to thank you so much for your time today. This was really great. I always enjoy hearing you talk about the research.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. It's been great that you guys have partnered with us on this as well. It's been good to see over the last few years.
Thank you. And for everybody listening, thanks so much for listening to BeelerCast. Have a great one.